What's going on, folks? Thanks for joining us today on CN Live. I'm Colion Noir, and later on we're going to catch up live with Taryn Butler in just a few. But our first guest is often called America's Sheriff or the People's Sheriff. Please welcome Sheriff David Clarke. How's it going?
Good, Colion. It's good to be on with you. Good to see you again.
Absolutely, absolutely. When's the last time we saw each other? Was I think it was it SHOT Show or the NRA annual convention?
Yeah, NRA, was it in Nashville, I think?
Yeah.
Nashville.
Wow, yeah, that was a while.
Yeah.
So let's just jump right into it. So what initially made you want to get into law enforcement?
Oh, I think a series of events. One, I was looking for a career.
Uh-huh.
At the time, I was driving a beer truck. A young kid, 20 years old, 21 years old. It's a pretty good job when you're that age.
Yeah, I can imagine.
The muscle, and you got the back to haul beer cases and kegs of beer up rickety stairs and whatnot. And then I just realized a couple of years of doing that, it wasn't something I wanted to do forever.
Uh-huh.
My father had, from time to time, he would ask if I ever thought of being a police officer, which I didn't at the time. But when I'm starting to sift through a series of things that I might want to do, brought that one back to the front, and here I am nearly 40 years later.
Any regrets whatsoever?
None, zero.
No.
You know, it had its ups and downs.
Uh-huh.
There's no doubt about that. It's kind of an emotional roller coaster sometimes. You know, you start out on third shift. You're walking back. When I started, you were walking a beat.
Yeah.
And third shift, and Wisconsin winters get cold. They didn't have the type of clothing that they have today. There was this thing as Gore-Tex. And,
yeah, it's all fancy now, man.
So, you know, but you survived. You found ways to stay warm.
Mm-hmm.
You grow up fast, and you had to survive. Yeah. So, you know, like I said, it hasn't been you know, for 40 years, it hasn't been a bowl of cherries. But overall, I mean, if you were to ask me would I do it again, hell yes.
Yeah. So what was if you were gonna take a snapshot and take a look at the way working the beat then versus working it now, what are some of the biggest differences between being a cop then and being a cop now that you've kind of picked up on? The
biggest difference is back then, and when I say back then, you know, we're talking the late 70s, early 80s.
Uh-huh.
People had respect for the police. When you told somebody to, you know, hey, hold up a second, they stopped. They didn't try to run from you. I'm not saying it never happened. It was rare. If you got in a foot chase, it was rare.
Yeah.
High-speed vehicle pursuits, extremely rare because people had respect for law enforcement. And, you know, that made it a lot more palatable to deal with. You know, when people were going to jail, you told them, put your hands behind your back, you did it. Nowadays, people want to challenge these cops on the street. They want to challenge their authority. They have no respect for them whatsoever. So I think overall, you know, we didn't have the technology back then like we had today. Mm-hmm. You know, but the world always moves forward. It doesn't move backwards.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing is, even among the criminal element, I mean, the society at large has always had respect for the police, respect for our authority. But even the criminal element, I mean, if a guy resisted arrest, by the time you got him in cuffs, he was apologizing for fighting with you.
Gotcha. So we're largely talking about the criminal class, of course, with respect to the level of respect the lack thereof, at least compared with today versus how it was before in the criminal element. And so now you think that they've been a little bit more, I guess, bolder.
Yeah, mildly. You know, also, if you take a look at the city of Milwaukee, that's where I'm from. I was born and raised here. I'm a native, and you know, you look at society as a whole in the city of Milwaukee, you had more intact families among, you know, the black community. So you had kids growing up with fathers involved in their lives. You know, fathers are responsible for the socialization of young men, young boys. And, you know, the fathers taught them how to be a man.
Yeah.
And one of those things was respect for authority of any kind. It started with your teachers.
Yeah.
Okay? It started with your neighbors. It wasn't just with the police. Because back then, you know, with the crime rates being a lot lower and the violence than it is today, you didn't have a lot of police interaction, even with young people. But what you're seeing now, Colion, is, excuse me, people at a younger and younger age involved. I'll give you an example. There was a double murder the other night in an adjoining suburb of Milwaukee called West Dallas.
Yeah.
A 17 and a 16-year-old, I think, were killed. the perpetrators are 13 and 14 years old.
Jesus.
So, yeah. So when you see that sort of stuff, you did not see that
Yeah.
From young people early in my career, but you started to see that change somewhere around the mid 80s, late 80s, and then all through the 90s. I think all of this stuff came to a head with dysfunctional families. You had failing schools. You had ineffective parenting. The economy went in the tank. People couldn't find meaningful work. All of that existed when I grew up in Milwaukee. All through my young life. Like I said, I was driving a beer truck. Before that, I had jobs. My first job was 16 at Burger King. So, you had people that could guide you and guide me and make sure that the wheels stayed on the track. And when that started to falter, all hell broke loose.
Yeah. So from your perspective, what do you think served as the biggest catalyst of driving the kind of the degradation in many ways of just kind of like traditional values that were kind of really held in high regard? Because I always like to say I've been part of basically two generations. I'm a Generation Xer in one sense, and then there's a millennial component. But us Generation Xers are raised by baby boomers. So I have this like ultra conservative aspect of me, and then there's this ability to kind of understand the more millennial components of what's going on now. So what do you think in your mind, from your vantage point, is the biggest driver of the negative components that you're seeing in society today?
I think some of our institutions that kept crime and violence in check, those pillars that formed a successful community. And I think that it starts with things like effective parenting. So an intact family, even if it's not intact, as long as you have effective parenting, one parent can probably make a go of it. You're defying the odds, but you can still get it done. The church played a role. All right. God's been marginalized, pushed to the side, out of the public square. You don't see the churches full like you did, a long time ago. You look at our schools, our K-12 urban public schools are failing miserably. So kids are growing up functionally illiterate. You're not going to go anywhere in this knowledge-based society or economy with not being able to read, write, add, subtract, multiply, and divide at grade level. Like I mentioned before, when the economy's gone through a couple of tailspins, and that's what happens. It's cyclical, but most of the time it bounces back. Well, several times it didn't bounce back, or it didn't bounce back to the good that it might have, and so you left people with no means of finding meaningful work to support a family, to raise a family, and then through all of that, government started to take on a bigger and bigger role, trying to replace the family, trying to, Uncle Sam became the father in the family. Yeah. Sam became the provider, right, with the rent assistance and some things like that, which there's nothing wrong with to help people along, but that became the family. Okay, Uncle Sam was the father. It destroyed motivation. Uncle Sam's a horrible dad. Uncle Sam, well, it's true. Uncle Sam doesn't love a child, a daughter or a son, like a maternal or a paternal parent would. And so as government started to play a bigger role, people didn't see, too many people didn't see it as important anymore to become self-sustaining. Yeah. They just relied on the government. And so government continued to grow and grow and grow. And it destroyed any concept of a family, in the city. And I'm talking about the city of Milwaukee, but you can really take this to any
pretty much
urban area, and you're going to find the same pathologies, I call them urban pathologies. So as government played a bigger role, it taught a lot of men who had kids. So don't worry about it. You don't have to raise your kids, take care of your kids. Uncle Sam will do it, and it's had devastating consequences.
Yeah, I would definitely have to agree with that. I talk to a lot of people when I do kind of go into my upbringing in many ways. I was raised by a single parent mother, and there was a period of time we lived in what was essentially can be considered the inner city. It was a brief time compared to what some people have to actually deal with. But I do remember having very dominant male figures in my life, whether it be even the people like certain like a boyfriend that she dated, somebody who was very prominent in my mind, and who I kind of modeled the idea of being a man after. And I think I in some ways lucked up in the sense of, I mean, he was somebody who was upstanding. He was you know, at the time he was in medical school, and was just really overall general a good dude. And so, and I contribute a lot of just my ability to do or be where I am at now just by those male influences. So I can definitely piggyback off that notion that the idea of having that example, even like you said, even if it's not the actual father, but just having someone in the home to be a good parent in that sense would do wonders for changing a lot of the issues. And
on a consistent basis, that's the big thing, you know, because, you know, obviously the two-parent is the ideal, but, you know, a single parent can do it. Makes it a lot harder, but if they stay determined and they instill virtues in their kids, they keep up with their kids in terms of school, make sure that, you know, this kid hits the books, gets good grades, shows up every day, things like that. I mean, I could name some very successful people in the United States of America that were basically raised by either a single parent or sometimes maybe the grandparents. You look at United States Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, he was raised by his grandfather. His grandfather, who, you know, his mom, his dad was never in his life. His mom had some severe problems in her life, mental problems, so she sent him to live with his grandfather, and his grandfather became his mentor and provided those things that a male role model needs to do. You look at Dr. Ben Carson, raised by a mom with a third-grade education, but she worked several jobs to raise those kids right. And she grew up, she raised them in the city of Detroit, the ghetto of Detroit, as a single mom, third grade. But she insisted that they get a good education. She sent them to the library all the time, made them read. So it can be done. It makes it a little tougher. But we're not seeing any effective parenting in the numbers that we need to see it today to overcome that single parent aspect.
Gotcha. Because I know there are a lot of people who would rebut that and say, well, no, those individuals were the exception to the rule, so to speak.
I would shows that it could be done.
Yeah, I can't argue with that at all. And like I said, I do vividly remember my mother basically pounding it into my head, the idea of always reading. I remember she wouldn't even let me go outside until I read the book and did the report and did all this other, you know, all the stuff I actually didn't want to do and didn't realize what it was doing for me until I got older. And then started actually going to school, going to college, and then realizing I had a fundamental base that I was pulling from, and I didn't even realize where I got it from until I started thinking back to those times. But we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll continue with Sheriff Clarke.